Hey guys, it's me, Rich. Your tax dollars, billions of them, have vanished. And the people responsible don't want you asking where they went. We're talking about a pattern of fraud so staggering, so brazen, so deliberately ignored that when investigators finally started pulling at the threads, Democratic lawmakers in California and elsewhere actually tried to take the investigation to a new level, making it illegal. We did a video on this yesterday, but today we're going to get into how the Democratic Party is the party of fraud. And what you'll find out if you stick with me to the end of this video is about the bad bureaucracy or sloppy bookkeeping. It's not about that. It's about a political machine that knows the money is gone, knows who took it, and is more concerned with silencing the people who found out than with getting it back. Let's get into it. All right, guys, welcome back to RPW Media, where we cut through the noise, we skip the spin, and tell you actually what's happening in this country, especially the stuff that the mainstream press would rather you never see. Look, if you like our videos already and you haven't done so, you should become a subscriber to the channel. You can hit that notification bell and smack that like button because it helps us get our message out to more people, and you'll be notified every time we put out a new video. Thank you very much. All right, let's start with a simple question, right? A question they don't really want you asking. When billions of taxpayer dollars vanish from government programs, daycare funds, autism treatment money, hospice care, Medicaid, what do the people running those programs have in common? Take a look. Minnesota, California, Washington State, some in New York. What do they share? They've all been run for years by the Democratic Party. And in every single case, when the fraud is finally exposed, the response from those same Democrats wasn't outrage, wasn't accountability. It was something far more revealing. We got silence. We saw deflection, and most recently, legislation to make the investigation of it illegal. Think about that for a moment, because it tells you everything. And here's what makes it worse. This isn't one story, it's four, and they all end the same way. So, Minnesota, $250 million betrayal of children. Let's start there, because the scale of what happened there is almost too large to fully comprehend. In Minnesota, a massive fraud scandal erupted across program after program. In the Feeding Our Future scam alone, 78 individuals were indicted and 57 convicted of various fraud-related crimes against the U.S. Department of Agriculture food programs, with taxpayer losses totaling $250 million or possibly more. The former Attorney General of the United States called it the country's largest pandemic-era fraud scheme. It gets worse. It always gets worse with Democrats, because Feeding Our Future wasn't operating in the shadows. People knew, they noticed, regulators had concerns. And what happened when those concerns were raised? Early on, Minnesota officials questioned some of the group's filings and slowed the approvals and reimbursements, which prompted Feeding Our Future to file a lawsuit accusing the state of racial discrimination. And guess what? The state backed down. Of course it did. They were afraid of being called racist. And so the fraud continued. The state auditor later confirmed what everyone suspected. The nonpartisan state legislative auditor's office found that Feeding Our Future's threats to accuse the Minnesota Department of Education of racism had affected the agency's judgment. Of course it did. An investigator from the state's fraud investigation office said that concerns over being portrayed as racist made the Walz administration reluctant to pursue fraud allegations. So because a bunch of racist scam artists threatened to call the Walz administration racist, Tampon Tim fell down to his knees and allowed it to continue. I call these people racist because anyone who throws accusations of racism without sufficient evidence are a piece of garbage racists themselves. Now, government officials knew there was fraud. They had evidence there was fraud, and they let it continue because they were afraid of bad press. That's the Democratic Party. It's not a bureaucratic failure, guys. It's a moral failure. And it happened on Tim Walz's watch, the same Tim Walz the Democratic Party put on their presidential ticket. Ask yourself, if they let 250 million walk out the door because they were scared of a lawsuit, what else did they let walk? Will there be anybody that looks into that? But the fraud didn't stop at food programs. Oh, not by a long shot. In the sprawling Medicaid program, prosecutors allege that half or more than Roughly $18 billion in Medicaid funds supporting 14 Minnesota-run programs since 2018 may have been stolen due to fraud. The autism treatment program was targeted too. Fraudsters created fake autism treatment firms and approached parents to recruit their children into the programs. They helped children get falsely diagnosed and then paid the parents a kickback for enrolling the kids, billing Medicaid millions of dollars for inflated bills and services never provided. Guys, that's our money that they used. Tim Walz allowed this to go on. They used disabled children as props in a fraud scheme. Let that sink in for a second. They used children. The Democratic government of Minnesota let it happen for years. And this party is the party that's telling us that in November, they want you to put them in charge of everything. The housing program there was hit too. The Housing Stabilization Services Program launched in 2020 with an estimated annual cost of $2.6 million, actually costs ballooned to $21 million in 2021, $42 million in 2022, $74 million in 2023, $104 million in 2024, and then they are on track to hit $122 million in 2005 once all the receipts come in. Nobody asked any questions. That's a hell of a growth pattern. The money just kept flowing and they just kept taking it. FBI Director Kash Patel said the agency believes this is just the tip of the very large iceberg, adding that the investigation very much remains ongoing. Now, the tip on a very large iceberg in one state, that's Minnesota. Let's move on to California, the kingdom of fraud. Now, let's go west. California, the crown jewel of the Democratic Party run by Gavin Newsom, a man who spent years positioning himself as the future of his party and the heir to the progressive throne. What did DOGE and federal prosecutors find when they started looking at California? After independent journalist Nick Shirley published a video alleging $170 million in fraud at registered hospice care and healthcare companies in California, Vice President J.D. Vance announced the federal government had suspended 447 hospices and 23 home health agencies suspected of fraud in Los Angeles alone, with total fraud in those schemes estimated at more than $600 million in one city, actually in one county, in one sector. California Attorney General Rob Bonta announced charges filed against 21 suspects and the dismantling of a major hospice fraud scheme that defrauded California of $267 million. A day late and a dollar short, dude. This has been going on for years under you guys. The scheme was staggering in its brazenness. Investigators say the accused fraudsters used the dark web to buy stolen identities of non-California residents, enrolled those identities into Medi-Cal, and billed for hospice services for the stolen identities, meaning there's no one there. No hospice services were ever rendered. It's not a billing error, guys. Corners weren't being cut. No, they invented patients out of thin air for the purpose of getting money. They enrolled people who were healthy, living in other states, who had no idea they had been placed in California's Medicaid rolls, and then billed the government for their non-existent care. The number of active hospices in the 5-county greater Los Angeles area spiked from 722 in 2018 to 1,799 in 2024. Nearly a quarter of all hospices in the country concentrated in one region. Nobody noticed. Or if they did, nobody acted. Are you kidding me? Gavin Newsom stood up and said, California has been fighting fraud for years. California's been creating fraud for years. He said this with a straight face, guys. Newsom declared, for years, California has led the charge to protect public programs from fraud and abuse. The same California that allowed nearly 1,800 hospices to spring up in Los Angeles alone. The same California where a $267 million phantom patient scheme operated for years before anyone was charged. Yeah, that California. This is what democratic government looks like. Not competence. It isn't accountability. Guys, it's all slogans. And here's the part that should genuinely disturb you. What comes next isn't incompetence, guys. It looks a lot more like an actual decision. Let's go to Washington State, another Democratic bastion. home of some of the most progressive politicians in America. And what did auditors find when they finally got around to looking at their childcare program? Ooh. Washington made an estimated $37 million in questionable childcare payments over the course of a single year using federal dollars, yours and my money, according to the state auditor's office. The audit found weaknesses within the Department of Children, Youth, and Families that contributed to frequent overpayments. Here's the part, though, that should make your blood boil. For 4 consecutive years, auditors said they could not determine whether subsidized child care funds were spent appropriately due to missing documentation. That's weird, isn't it? The fiscal year 2024 audit received a disclaimer opinion, meaning that more than $413 million in federal funding was unauditable. 4 years. They couldn't audit 4 years of spending. Over $400 million, untraceable, gone, in the wind. This is what happens when Democrats are in charge. The state pays these providers first and checks the paperwork later on. A system that resulted in overpayments being identified 67% of the time during the department's own follow-up reviews. 2/3 of the time they audit a payment, they find an overpayment. 2/3 of the time, and their solution was to keep paying first and ask questions later. They just kept sending the money, and the others kept taking it. Washington's Attorney General called the fraud allegations, they're baseless, even as auditors were documenting them in real time. You can't make this stuff up. All right, here's another one, ActBlue. It's the money machine for Democrats. They lied to Congress. Let's talk about this fundraising operation that powers all of this, because what good is examining the fraud on the spending side if you ignore the fraud on the fundraising side? ActBlue is the main platform used by Democratic candidates and causes, meaning leftist liberal causes. Since its founding, more than 28 million people have donated through ActBlue, which processed $1.78 billion last year alone. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton spent years investigating this platform. And this week, he filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit alleges ActBlue misled consumers about its unlawful donation processes that allow fraudulent and foreign donations to undermine the integrity of American elections. I thought the Democrats told us with this Russia hoax BS that we can't let foreigners in on our elections, but look what they did. ActBlue has processed more than $16 billion since its founding in 2004, and a lot of that was through foreign donations. There are people who say that they donated $10 one time to ActBlue, and yet their names have been found hundreds of times, giving the same donation, even though it didn't come from them. In other words, this criminal organization allegedly is using people's identities to make phony donations that are probably coming from George Soros and all the other usual suspects on the billionaire left. So what did the investigation find? Paxton claims that despite telling Congress it would no longer accept donations through gift cards in September 2024, the platform later quietly resumed accepting them. So they lied. As part of his investigation, Paxton writes that investigators from the Texas Attorney General's office successfully made donations through the platform using gift cards, including one made using a fake identity. Well, there you go. They told Congress they stopped. They didn't stop. And Paxton's investigators proved it, using gift cards and fake names to donate successfully to the Democratic National Committee. But it gets even more damning. A law firm working for ActBlue wrote in private memos that the platform's CEO gave potentially misleading information to Congress about its security practices, and that ActBlue's staff, quote, was aware that its system was not as robust as necessary, end quote, suggesting that violations could be considered knowing and willful. When your own lawyers told them that they were lying about Congress, I mean, they just kept doing it. As recently as February 2026, this year, investigators from Paxton's office made 3 donations on ActBlue using false identities and prepaid gift cards, and the donations successfully reached the Democratic National Committee and 2 state Texas officials' campaign accounts. Can you believe this? The Democratic Party's fundraising backbone was, and apparently still is, wide open to foreign money and fraudulent contributions, and they knew it. So let me ask you this question. If the money going into this party can't be verified and the money going out through its program keeps disappearing, at what point does incompetence stop being the right word? All right, let's move on to DOGE. When DOGE started pulling at these threads, the Medicaid programs, the childcare funds, the unemployment insurance, what they found was staggering. Remember all of this? Democrats want you to forget by November. The U.S. Government Accountability Office found $51.1 billion in improper payments, including overpayments, inaccurate record keeping, or fraud. In Medicaid alone during fiscal year 2023, it also found $43.6 billion in improper payments in the federal Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program and $21.9 billion in improper payments in the Earned Income Tax Credit Program in the same year. Everything by Democrats is rigged and fraudulent. Everything. That's over $100 billion in improper payments in just 3 programs in a single year. Programs that were dramatically expanded under Democratic administrations. Programs that Democrats fought to protect from scrutiny. At the DOGE subcommittee's first hearing, the findings, I'm trying to remind you guys of all this, the findings were breathtaking. The committee highlighted $2.7 trillion with a T dollars in improper payments since 2003. That's how long this has been going, describing what could be the biggest money laundering scandal in American history. $2.7 trillion since 2003. And then they tried to make it illegal. Here is where the story takes its darkest turn. After journalist Nick Shirley exposed fraud at California healthcare facilities, videos that went viral that prompted federal investigators that led to real arrests and real accountability, California Democrats responded, not by thanking him, not by vowing to clean house. They introduced a bill to silence him. We talked about this in yesterday's video. Go check it out. Think about what all of this means. You film a building that is billing the government for services never rendered. You post a video. Under this bill, you could be fined tens of thousands of dollars and sent to jail. The message is pretty simple. California's Democratic leadership could not be clearer. We would rather criminalize the exposure of fraud than end the fraud itself. They want to steal your money. That's what they're telling you. And they want you to put them in charge of everything in November. There's a pattern. Every single one of these scandals, Minnesota, California, Washington State, ActBlue, shares the same DNA. Government programs with minimal oversight run by people who treated accountability as a form of racism or political attack. Money flowing out the door faster than anyone could ever count it. Whistleblowers ignored or threatened, investigators stonewalled. And when the truth finally came out, legislation was designed to make sure the truth couldn't come out ever again. This is not a series of isolated failures, guys, which is what they're going to try and tell you. It's a pattern. And the American people deserve to know about it. The question isn't just where the money went. The question is, who benefits from a system designed not to find out? Now, here's where we land. Hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars have been looted through fake patients, phantom daycares, invented diagnoses, and ghost hospices. The government's overseeing this spending didn't just fail to stop it, guys. In multiple cases, they knew, and they let it continue. The fundraising machine that funds those governments was lying to Congress about basic security while foreign money and fake donors flowed freely. And when a journalist finally exposed the rat on camera, lawmakers moved to put him in jail. Here's the upside, though, and there is one. This is being exposed now in real time. Federal investigators are active. Prosecutors are filing charges. The DOGE subcommittee is putting $2.7 trillion of missing money on record. Journalists are publishing, mostly independent journalists, because the real ones are fake. The real ones are fake. Attorneys general are suing. The people responsible for this are being named. And for the first time in a long time, the system that was designed not to find out is being forced to answer anyway. The truth has a way of coming out. And right now it's coming out fast. And you can thank your lucky stars that we still have a Republican Party in this country, because all of this would have been swept under the rug if we didn't have enough Republicans that stood up to this and spoke out loud about it. All right, so tell me what you think about this in the comments below. I love hearing from you guys. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.